I want to thank Anand for the work that he's doing for the community as well as for young entrepreneurs. And I'll seek a personal counseling session with him to figure out what do you do when you look and feel 50, but you're not. So with that, when I was asked to speak about this topic, at HARMAN we do a lot of verticals. We do retail, we do automotive, we do telecom. But this is one of the exciting verticals that we work on. And Fast and Furious happens to be one of my favorite movies as well. So here we go. Let me start by saying, and this comes again from the theme from the last speaker. When I came out of college, and when I looked at what I'm going to do, unfortunately, I didn't know I need to network and do all that Anand was telling me to do. But I think my first aim in life was to have a car and to own a house. I think, at least in my generation, which is a long, long time back, I think most people who came out of college would have that dream, right? If I look at the generation today, I don't think they have that dream at all. They do not look at buying a car. They do not consider it as a, as an aspirational asset, and that has come about because of Uber and Ola, right? So just to start with some, some data points, we're in an industry which is very strange. It is unlike any other vertical that I've seen, at least in my career, right? Look at the volume of car sales. It's actually either going down or staying flat. And this is true across geographies. This is true in the US. This is true in China. This is largely true in India. Even, you saw some stats for the last 2 quarters in India. So it's strange, because for a very long time, for 75 years, this was a vertical which hardly ever dipped. It was always on the uptake. I don't have the slide there, but if you look at the engineering spend or the R&D spend in this vertical, that has kept climbing. And that is really strange because, normally, your spend on R&D in any vertical would track your sales, right? So hence, it is, it is a little strange. And we'll get into, why that is. So here is one of the trends, that is affecting or that is kind of soliciting the changes that you see right now. It's rideshare, right? As I said, companies like Lyft, Ola, Uber, they have really transformed this business, in terms of how we look at transportation inside cities. And you can see the penetration over the years. It's at a steady growth rate. And at 2023, the total number of people using cars, about 20% of them would be solely using rideshare, which is Ola. And that's where my earlier comment, people coming out of college do not see car as an asset. In fact, they see it as a liability. The other data point in terms of the revenue growth for all those companies put together, you can see the numbers there. Even though the number of car sales is decreasing, the revenues for the rideshare economies or those companies is constantly on the uptake, right? Which clearly means they are grabbing a lot of market share from that. And if you look at data in terms of actual car sales, especially in India, now the biggest customer for any OEM, particularly like Maruti or anyone, is actually Ola. It's not individual consumers, it's actually Ola. Second thing which is happening, right? Electrification of vehicles, right? You would see on this chart, unfortunately, I would have loved to see, India on that chart, but India is not even on that chart. And who is at the top? Norway, right? You can see 50% penetration in terms of electric vehicles in Norway, right? And look at the penetration in 2.1. Obviously, some of this is political. There is a huge lobby, which is the oil lobby, so on and so forth, which fights electrification of vehicles. But what is interesting is there is clearly a trend. This number will keep increasing year on year. There is no stopping it, right? And you've seen the, mandate from the Indian government. Every single OEM needs to have electrical vehicle platform. Right? So, it is a given that you will see penetration, happening in the The third trend, in terms of automotive driving, autonomous driving, sorry. I just put this slide so that if people here are not from the automotive background, they can understand what autonomous driving really means. There are 5 levels of autonomous driving. At its peak, which is level 5, you don't need to touch anything in the car. You just sit in the car, maybe give a verbal command, and you will be taken from point A to B. That's the top level of autonomous driving, right? If some of you happen to drive, the latest series of Daimler cars, which is the Mercedes or the BMWs or the Audis, we are actually at level very close to level 2. We are almost complete, where level 2 dictates that almost 2 functions should be able to be completely non-manual mode. So if you go into cruise control, I think most good cars would have cruise control, which is completely automated. And also, there is one other function, which is lane centering. At least in the high-end cars, you do have lane centering, which it can handle on itself. And plus, now companies are slowly soliciting other solutions, like if I'm falling asleep, they actually monitor my eyelids, and they would raise an alarm. They will throw up the location of the next coffee shop, so on and so forth, right? So, it's very interesting. We are at level 2. Level 2 to level 3 is actually a critical, that's the critical mass. You really flip over into, complete autonomous driving when you get there. I just wanted this as a context. Obviously, the utopian dream is to get to level 5, but obviously it takes a lot of investments, and that brings me to my earlier point. This is where all the investment is going. From getting to level 2 to level 5, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of technology, and we'll get into what that entails. Okay. The other thing which I thought might be interesting is, when I'll go back to long time back when I came out of college, I just wanted a car. I did not even ask the question, is it connected? There was no concept of a connected car. There was nothing like connected, right? But for everything that I've shown you, whether it is electrification, whether it is ride sharing, or whether it is autonomous driving, the connectivity to the car is paramount, because it is the cloud-based intelligence that is going to drive a lot of that solutioning that is going to happen, inside the car. So connectivity is the #1 requirement, for the car, and you can see the jump in terms of, both number of units and volumes that is happening. That's one. Secondly, more importantly, there are a lot of cars on the road today which are from the previous generation which are not connected. So that's a huge market as well, and hence you see solutions like a dongle, so on and so forth, which you can plug into the car, and it has an eSIM, and that makes it connected. So people are working, including HARMAN, we are working to get those cars connected as well. It's a huge market, almost as big as new cars. All right. So eventually, I just gave you the broad trends of what what it entails, from an automotive point of view. But what would it eventually mean? We are talking about at the full 5th level of autonomous driving. We are talking about, you can see the details here, but in essence, we are looking at something like 4,000 gigabits of data, generated on a daily basis, from autonomous driving. Some of you who are in, the data center world, or who are in the connectivity world, can understand the, the scale of the problem here. The scale of the problem is manifold, right? First of all, how do you collect so much data? There are so many sensors that you have to put in the car to be able to collect data from all those, points that are there inside the car, right? And there is a slide on that as well. Second is, how do I process that data, right? Okay, I have collected it. How do I process that amount of data almost in real time? Because, you're driving, it's complete autonomous. You're figuring out your environment. There is stuff happening inside the car. You're talking to your wife or your girlfriend, whichever the case might be. You're working on emails, so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot happening, and you're processing all of this in real time, right? So that's the second level of difficulty that you have to face, or challenge that you have to overcome. Third, you need connectivity with that bandwidth in a moving vehicle, which is going to provide you a real-time connectivity with that kind of a bandwidth, right? So there is a cost element to that, and there is a connectivity element to that. So that's why, in my personal view, 5G is going to be the baseline. If we do not have 5G inside the car, much of the autonomous driving at a fifth level is a pipe dream, just because of the connectivity piece. Then if I go to the back-end side, a complete infrastructure is required to support the data and the processing that is required to push this whole system real time, back to you, right? So, that's the challenge we are facing, and that's why, we need to blitzscale, as was this theme, on all these points, whether it's collection, whether it's processing, whether it's connectivity, or whether it's, your back-end stuff. So here is, just to give you an idea, earlier, when you were people who are from the automotive world, there was only one computing element inside the car, which looked at the engine. There was only one ECU. It's called ECU, which basically took data from the car, analyzed it. All of it, or most of it, actually was from the engine and mechanical elements. And that's what you did. Now look at the complexity when we have all of what I spoke about. Look at the number of things that you need to handle, right from electrification to your connectivity in 5G, your cockpit management, because it's completely a digital cockpit, from a security point of view, which I'll talk about, your cloud connectivity, your over-the-air updates, because it's all software, right? Everything is being driven by software, and it's just like a phone, right? It's just that you're sitting inside the phone, right? So now, all of your updates for all your applications and all of your management software, needs to be handled in real time. So, OTA, which is over the air, becomes important. So that brings me, so here's the slide on security updates. So first of all, in the classical automotive world, what used to happen is, and it pissed me off no end, in that industry, and I come from a telecom background, and suddenly I was put in charge of the automotive business, and they're worlds apart. And here is why. In the automotive world, if you're launching a car 2 years out, right, you would stop all software development on that car at least 1 year before the launch date, right? To me, as a person who comes from the software industry, there is nothing more criminal than that, right? The reasons are twofold. Because that inhibits my capacity to push new features into the car because I've lost that 1 year from the launch date. Secondly, if there are problems inside the software that I know of, it reduces a lot of time for me in terms of what I want to introduce as software updates inside the car, because there is a freeze which happens, and then it's only mechanical work. That world is changing very, very fast, to the extent that now what is actually happening is there are 2 updates that go inside the car. One is when it's right at the end of its mechanical line. So once you've literally put the wheels on the car, that's when you give the software update. So you've done all of your software development and the management of your bugs, so on and so forth. And only at the last leg of your actual manufacturing, you push an update, right? And it doesn't stop there. The car, once it's manufactured, actually goes to the dealerships, right? So a lot of cars are actually parked in dealerships, and you don't know for how long. They might be there for 2 months. They might be there for 6 months, some of them longer, right, if they're not selling. How do you manage that? So what we've done together with the OEMs is we push those updates inside those cars when you turn it on the first time, because they're still inside the dealership. You're still in a Wi-Fi network. It basically, just like you turn your Apple phone or a Samsung phone on, and it checks for all the updates. That's exactly what a car is going to do, and it is doing that. Once you turn it on, it checks what is my latest update that I need to download. And you don't need to worry about connectivity, because you're still in the dealer network, and you'll enforce a Wi-Fi connectivity at that point. But the other problem this brings to, as I said, it's a phone, but you're sitting inside the phone. If my phone fails, what's the worst that can happen? I can drop a call. I might miss a few messages. But it's not going to kill me, right? But if you're inside the car and something goes wrong, if the software update goes wrong, if your brakes fail, your accelerator misfires, something like that, it actually has a potential to kill you, right? And if you've looked at data for the last 10 years, the number one cost on any OEM's books is the liability cost that they carry for those kind of incidents. They write it off, and they actually allocate that cost on their books. Volkswagen had to pretty much use last 20 years of that liability when that whole case came out. The point I'm trying to make is, in this case, it's not just important that we do it right, we do it really right, because in this kind of a solution, it can kill people, right? And not just that, once you have that kind of a solution inside the car, it's very, very imperative that you protect it from a security point of view. Because if somebody hacks inside, it's a fully connected system, it's over 5G or a 4G system. If somebody hacks into your car, there are actual cases of that happening, and somehow manipulates the driver functions, so on and so forth, again, it's a mortal risk to the driver, right? So all of that liability is on that ecosystem and the OEM who's generating the car. So it's a huge thing that we need to deal with. The other thing is, if it's autonomous driving, right? I'm not even touching anything inside the car. What do I really do? Because again, me as an oldie, I bought a car because I love driving. The only reason I wanted to buy a car because I just love driving. But what if you take that out, because there is no driving anymore? So what are people going to do when they're inside the car? The answer is very simple. The car then becomes your home, and the car then becomes your office. Everything that you can think of, almost everything that you can think of, probably apart from taking a bath, that you do at home or in your office, you'll probably be able to do inside your car. So again, from a connectivity point of view and from a media and entertainment point of view, it's a huge business. What it really means is, and I have a video later I think you'll enjoy, pretty much your car is one big screen, because you don't have to touch anything, you don't have to deal with any of the logistics, because it's all managed by the cloud, and you can just enjoy the ride, literally, right? So what do? You have a lot of screens, you watch movies, you can do your teleconferencing with your colleagues, whatever makes it tick for you. This is a slide. I don't mean to go through this slide. I do not mean to read through this slide. But this slide represents two things. One is the complexity of this ecosystem. All these players are involved in everything that I spoke of, whether it is electrification, whether it is autonomous driving, whether it is ride sharing, right? All of these people are involved in one or the other aspect of that. Not just that, all of these about 3 years back were startups. And many of these, or actually most of these probably, are actually unicorns at this point, right? So the point I'm trying to make is it literally takes a village to create what I just spoke of, that entire solution. And that's part, blitzscaling does not mean that you put rocket fuel inside what you have. Blitzscaling means that you put a little bit of innovation out into the world in various geographies, and you let it kindle, right? Because you can see all of these are actually startups at some point in time, and they have grown and now become such an essential part of that ecosystem, which is delivering what I just spoke of, and which is the utopian solution. Sorry. I'll actually go back, and if I can cue the video, and then I'll make my closing comments. right, so that was just a showcase of one of the cars, which is a concept car that we did for the CS, I think a couple of years back. I was lucky enough to actually have a ride in the car in Germany, and it's absolutely fabulous. So the good part is, everything that I talked about, the technology that we saw is here today, right? It's just now a question of blitz scaling and mass scaling it, right? And getting it to a price point, which always happens. When cell phones were launched, some of you who are old enough as me, if you remember the size of the cell phones that were launched, it's something similar, and the cost of a call and so on and so forth. So we are at the same point, of inflection in this journey as well, but all this technology is here now. I've sat in the car, I've experienced it, right? And if you happen to go to the Bay Area, you will see one of the Google cars or Amazon cars on the road. So don't be surprised, there'll be no driver in the car, right? So all of this is here now. And to make the last point, I mentioned a couple of things about India, that India is a little lagging in terms of electrification, so on and so forth. But on our part, India continues to be a central hub and spoke in terms of delivering whatever I spoke about at a global level, not just for Indian customers. We work for a lot of Indian customers, but also at a global level. For us, India is that center. This is just one example of our new factory coming up near Pune. So we are working very closely with the Indian government and making a lot of investments in India. And I'm really proud that a lot of that innovation is actually happening in India, and we are driving that change. With that, thank you very much.